Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to look at the groupBy function in Ramda. And groupBy is one of those functions that is actually implemented in native JavaScript on the object prototype, but it doesn't work in Node, not the built-in one, not the Node version I have anyway. So I'm here in the Svelte REPL, and I pulled this um, out of the documentation here. And so it says baseline 2024 newly available. This recording is summer of 2025. Note some browsers, this method was implemented as the array group. Um, Due to compatibility issues, it's implemented as a static method, or now implemented as a static method. Okay, so here's the example that I grabbed. Let's look, that's the syntax, the object dot group by. And then we pass in the object that we want to act on and the callback function. And the callback function gets the element and the index. Um, the index of the current element being processed. That's interesting because it's an object. So I wouldn't think that it would give you the index, but here it says it does. So let's look at the built-in one first. So I've got this array called inventory, and it has 5 objects in it. And the callback function that we're using, let's see, result is, so it's not a function result, it's just a value. And we're calling group by, we're passing in this inventory. And then the callback function, we're destructuring the quantity property and then checking if the quantity is less than 6. And if it is, we return restock. And if it's not, we return sufficient. And I'm just looking. Oh, you know what? Let's change this to greater than. Yeah, because it was only giving us one value back. So what we've got here, we return restock or sufficient. And what are we doing? Oh, so we're only showing the restock. Let's show the whole result. That's better. So what we've got here is we've got this object, starts here, ends here, and there are 2 properties. And so what we've done, we started with an array of just flat objects. Now we've got an object with 2 arrays. So it broke this up based on a key called restock or sufficient, based on how large the quantity is. Um, so let's see. All of these are greater than 6, except for the second one, bananas. So here we have sufficient, we have an array of just the objects. So really, it just groups it in another container, another object, and then adds all the entries of the original object into these sub arrays of objects, right? So I'm going to grab, oh, actually, I already grabbed that. So let's go into Node here, right? So I've got this whole inventory thing ready to go. But let's look at the definition. The definition of this is a little hairy, but I understood it once I looked at the example. So it splits a list into sublists, right? So, like if you remember on that last screen, we had a sufficient list and we had a restock list. So splits it into sublists stored in an object. So the whole thing we're going to get back is one object with 2 properties, and those properties hold an array of objects based on the result of calling a key returning function. So the function that we had returned either sufficient or restock, and those would be the keys that we use for our sublists. And it groups the results according to the values returned. So that's the part that made me question exactly how it works. And then we got the act as a transducer. We're going to skip that. And we'll look at collect by. And we'll get to these other ones once we get to them alphabetically. But for now, collect by is very similar. So if we look at the uh, type signature, we have this type constraint where it says index of A's, and then we have the fat arrow. So what this is saying is that A needs to be either a string, an int, or a symbol. And nobody ever really uses symbols. Um, so in our case, it's going to be a string or an int. And actually, specifically, it's going to be a string. So a key generating function, that's what it takes. So that's what this B to A is. So we're going to pass in a list of B's. And as we iterate through that, uh, each thing in the array will be the input value, and it will return some sort of A. And here, remember, A has to be a string or an int. So the A is going to be the key. And then it's going to return an object with A, which is the key, and then the list of B's that match what they say, grouping the results according to the values returned. So the values of B that are, or sorry, the array items that have the key A. Let's look here. So again, a function that takes an A and returns an index, or like a key, and then the list of objects to group. And it returns an object with the output of function for keys, right? So the output of the here, the output of these indexes, these keys it's going to give us, map to array of elements that are produced, or sorry, elements that produce that key when passed to the function. So again, this is one of those things where, to me, the description is a little hard to understand until you start working with it. So let's start working with it. Let's log here. And so what are we going to need? We're going to need to say r.groupBy. And then the first thing we want is a function. So let's go with that other one. So we said where the quantity, we'll have to destructure that. So we get the object, but let's say we want the quantity. And then let's check if the quantity is greater than, um, let's do a better value this time, greater than 12. Yeah, I'm just thinking, put this on multiple lines. Yeah, the quantity is greater than 12. Then we want to return, and we have to return a key, a string or an int. So let's return a string that says, we'll just do the same one. It's either going to be restock or sufficient. All right. And let's see. First is the key, and the second is the object. So we'll pass it in a curried fashion and pass the inventory. Let's see if that's right. What am I doing? Node index JS. Get a function. So I didn't do that quite right here. Looking for one more argument. Did I put the argument in the wrong place? see if I run that, it should only asking for one. So that's the log. This whole thing is the function. I'm going to pass it inside instead of currying it. Yeah, that's weird. Is it not curried? I don't know. We'll get back to that. Make this a little bigger here. Um, but anyway, let's see what we got. We got, let clean this up a little bit. Here we go. So now we've got this object, and inside now we've got two properties, and each property holds an array of objects. So it basically takes one list, splits it into two lists. We could probably split it into threes somehow, but I'm not sure I want to go that far. But this is pretty handy. You get an array of objects back from an API or something, and it's not quite the shape you want. You want to group things. You can use this. Possibly, let's think of another way to do this. In fact, I'm going to pull this function out and name it. I don't know what to name it, so I'm going to name it function. So that should work. Clear the console. Yep, that still works. And before I tried to curry it, and it didn't work. Or not curry it, but call it like that. And that still works. So it was just a syntax error when I was trying to do it before. Uh, yeah, that's pretty handy. So really, it's all about the function that you use and what keys it creates. So let's do one where we group it by type. And now let's see, how could I do that? What if I just returned type equals fruit? What would that do? Clear the console. Okay, so that gives us back true and false. And that makes sense because that's what we're asking. Does the type equal fruit? Um, but we could return strings. So that's interesting. If it returns true or false, which is a Boolean, but this is saying the index has to return a string or an int or a symbol. But these are clearly Booleans. But since they're objects, it's turning the Boolean into a string. That's what's happening, I think. Doesn't matter so much. But let's say the type equals a fruit, then we would want to return fruit, the word fruit, the string. And then we could say other. So I expect to see the same thing, but with fruit and other. So, sorry, clear that, run it. Yeah, we've got other and fruit. Yeah. So you could play around with this, but it's very straightforward. The only thing that you have to concern yourself with is how you want to return keys. And whatever keys these return, then it's going to go through and look at those keys. So, for example, the type and the fruit, and it's going to say, yeah, type equals this fruit. So we're going to make a fruit array. And then anything that doesn't match the type fruit, we're going to make an other array and put the objects inside of it. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Now let's get back to this and just try to understand this description a little better. So it splits a list into sublists. Okay, I got that stored in an object, which are these keys that we return. Based on the result of calling a key returning function, yeah, we got that on each element, and then grouping the results according to the values returned. So that means grouping the results according to the values returned. And I guess the values are the objects. Let's see if that groups it according to the values returned. I'm gonna look at this object with the output of function for keys mapped to the arrays of elements that produce that key. Yeah, the arrays of elements. So uh, each object is going to be an array, and that array is going to hold the objects that are grouped by that key. Yeah, I mean, I only 80% understand what I just said, but I do understand how to use the function, and I do understand when to use the function. What I'm going for. So that's pretty cool. It was added in version 0.1, so it looks like the very first version probably of Ramda, which came out I think in 2013, and then in 2024 it was added to most browsers, and I don't know if it's in the latest version of Node or not. Um, but yeah, it's very useful. It was in here before it was built in. So keeping in mind this type signature with the type constraint, where the A has to be of type string, int, or symbol, it takes that function that takes the item, the object in the list, and returns one of these keys, and then gives us back an object grouped by the keys. But let's look at collect by. And collect by is very similar. The index is still, the type of A is still constrained to be an index of string, int, or symbol. And it still takes the same type of function or the same type signature, a B to A, where B is the items in the list and A is the index, string, or int. But this one returns a list of Bs, a list of Bs. Um, I wonder if I can use the same thing here. Yeah, this is an array of objects, so I can probably use the same data. So let's do that. So here we got r.collect by, and now this is interesting. This you're not using. I mean, it says a function. Oh yeah, they are using a function. So they're basically destructuring the type. So let's destructure the type as well too. So again, I'm gonna separate these into functions. So it's a little easier to read. Call it fn. Going to be a callback function. We're going to destructure the, oh, too many parentheses. We're going to destructure the type property. And here we go. And it looks like we just return the type. In their example, yeah, just anything that matches the type. So let's say function, wait, what am I doing? Function, and then we call it like that, the inventory, clear that. Yeah, and it's very similar, but remember in group by, it gave us back an object with the A being the key and then the arrays of objects. Here, it's a list of lists, right? So we have our outer array, and then we have an inner array that matches the type vegetables, and then a second inner array that matches the type fruits, and then the third inner array, which matches the type meat. So we didn't really have to return, I mean, we did return a key. We returned the key type. What if we did like an if statement and said type equals meat? Oh, what am I doing? Type equals meat. I don't want to just return type. I want to say, here, let's do it where we say type equals vegetables. Then we can say like vegan. I'm gonna drop this down to another line. And then if not, we can say, oh, we got fruit too. So let's say, let's go back to meat. Let's see if that works. Clear that. Yeah. And then so now we've got two. So again, pretty useful. You know, the key is that, no pun intended, you just need to return a key. You need to return something that it can look through and it matches on that key. We could go in here and do a nested one and say, no, that won't work. What I was thinking in my head won't work. So I'll just leave it there. Uh, but what's interesting in this one is this may be one of the first ones that we've looked at where there is a type constraint in the type signature. So, the key is that you've got this fat arrow versus just these skinny arrows. So when you have the fat arrow, you're basically putting a constraint on these, I think we call polymorphic functions, which are pretty loose about what type you're passing in. It could, B could be an array of numbers or an array of objects or an array of whatever. So yeah, pretty cool. Um, I don't want to get into, well, it says group by. I don't want to get into partition. I don't want to get into, feel like transduce is going to be complicated. Um, and index by, I think we might have looked at that one. To be honest with you, collect by, I don't think was actually in the original series. It was added in version 28. That might have been after Chris did the first series of the Ramda deep dive. Um, yeah, pretty cool. So the next one we're going to look at is group with, and I feel like that's pretty simple. And then oh, the only two are greater than and greater than equals, and that's pretty simple. So we'll fly through the G's really quickly and then get to the H's. Um, but I'm going to do that in a separate video. So I will see you then. Thanks for spending your time with me, and tell a friend.